Welcome to a premium speed reading video training course. I'm going to give this to you for free because I believe in delivering valuable content that is better than other people's paid content for free. In this video course, we're going to be covering the fundamentals of speed reading and explaining why it matters, innovative ways of doing it, and on top of that, we're going to be covering and debunking some myths about speed reading and addressing skepticism. And trust me, I used to be that skeptic. So let's really dive into it. I'm going to show you how to read more in less time without reducing comprehension or retention. So first off, you might be wondering, why should I care? I haven't read a book in 7 years. Or, I read slowly, I don't know if this will help. Or you might be thinking, well, speed reading is a scam and it doesn't actually work. First off, you read more than you think. Even if you don't read books, you're reading emails, articles, text messages, you're reading at least one word, whether it's what you're seeing on the slide right now, or the stop sign, or your menu at a restaurant. You're reading PowerPoint slides, news articles, tweets, emails, ads, stuff on a website navigation menu. Quite frankly, most everything you do has some text in it. If you think about it, Facebook and YouTube are essentially filled with text all over, from the titles of videos to people's statuses. Now, the second thing is that you can really dramatically improve your ability to be productive just by improving speed reading or your reading ability slightly. Now, I'm going to have conservative numbers here, so even if you just do the bare minimum, you're going to see massive results. And by the end of this training, you're probably going to see more than minimal increases. So a survey of 5,067 adults found the average person reads for 2 hours a day. If you can double your reading and save 1 hour a day, you can save 365 hours a year, which is equivalent of 90 40-hour work weeks a year. So essentially, you could literally take back 2.5 months in every working year of your life just by doubling your speed reading, your reading rate. And what you'll see here is that just by adopting a lot of these basic principles, people initially off the gate have done more than double their speed reading. And we'll show you this because you're going to be measuring your reading rate during this training and then after you've learned these principles. You'll see jumps immediately, but the bigger gains will come even more after you start practicing and practicing. So we'll get started. We'll see what happens. So I used to be really skeptical of speed reading as well. I thought it was skimming or just skipping a lot of content. And the truth is that some people do scam others out there. One of them I remember is Howard Berg. He went on national television and claimed he could read thousands of pages of this dense healthcare bill in a couple minutes, and it literally just looked like he was just like shuffling through pages. Like he would literally give each page less than a second of time. And I thought it was just a big show. I didn't think he was honest. I didn't think it convinced me or proved to me that he was speed reading. No, instead, my philosophy and the fundamental principles I'll be teaching you are based on actionable, provable concepts with actual backing that you can actually test and see the results with, without doing any weird gimmicks or tricks that promise ridiculously unbelievable results. I believe that speed reading has its limits. You won't be able to read 200 pages a second like some claim. It's not a miracle cure. As mentioned, Howard Berg may claim that he can read 1,500 pages in a couple minutes. For me, I'm just trying to help you, increase it from a few pages in a minute to maybe a dozen pages in a minute. You can see a noticeable increase, especially the more you practice. But there is a limit. The researcher Keith Rayner of UCSD says that comprehension goes to pieces when you look at dense, complicated topics, and you're limited by the anatomy of what your fovea can see. Your fovea is a core central area of your eye that really focuses your attention. When words start to be seen outside of this area of your eye, the acuity drops off dramatically. So I definitely agree with this. I think that depending on the topic, such as if you're reading a boring health bill or you're reading Harry Potter, your comprehension will change dramatically just based off how dense, boring, and dry the text is, and how interested you are in the material yourself. My story with speed reading, I started off reading very slowly. I heard Warren Buffett say he wasted 10 years reading slow when he had a Q&A session with Bill Gates. And after I thought about that and saw Bill Gates say that his superpower, one of his superpowers, would be reading faster, I really wanted to get better at reading. I thought I wanted to save time in my life and not waste 10 years. Who wants to waste 10 years of their life? So I wanted to learn speed reading, but I was skeptical. I ended up taking a few courses, watching a lot of YouTube videos, and reading some books from some of the established speed reading academies and programs out there. And the universe is small but varied. Like I mentioned, some of the academies out there seem scammy to me. Some of them have some of the weirdest techniques that I thought was more just to make you feel like it was fancy rather than actually help you. Like there's some of weird techniques, like the spiral technique, where you would like read a page in a spiral, or like and they had like hundreds of different like reading methods, like the tree method, where you would read in the shape of a tree, and then there's like bottom up and like side to side and up, and just the weirdest shapes. And I just thought, it just seemed to me like people were making this stuff up, and I would test it out and it would not help at all. It's like you're gonna read like the last part of the page and then somehow piece together what they're trying to tell. It's kind of like listening to a story backwards. So essentially I was still quite skeptical, and I ultimately ended up settling with verifiable practices, the fundamental practices, and it's helped me double my reading speed without losing comprehension. And as you can see from the picture, I tend to read a lot, and I think reading is like one of the keys to success. It's not the only way, it's not the only path, but if you can really distill the principles, the mistakes, the lessons learned from thousands of successful people who have come before you, you're off to a much better start than most people. It's so much better to read like a biography from like a real hustler than to read some top 10 success traits article by some anonymous writer on some generic site whose main focus is to go viral. You can't trust that. So now it's time to play a game. we're going to be testing your speed reading. So pause this video, go to myreadspeed.com/calculate, or you could just Google speed reading, Google reading rate calculator, and you can just search up any reading rate calculator you want to find out your current reading speed. I recommend myreadspeed.com/calculate because it's very intuitive, it's very simple, you don't have to read too much, and it's something that gives a fairly accurate read. So once you've done that, unpause the video and we'll continue. Cool, so now you've gotten your reading speed now. Just hold on to that. Whatever that number is, it'll give you a words per minute number. And you can test it again after this training is over and just see the immediate increases once you implement some of these principles. That said, keep practicing because they will continue to increase the more you practice. And you don't need a fancy online calculator to calculate your reading speed either. You can literally just read a book and time yourself for 1 minute, and then get the average number of words per line, count the number of lines, and that'll give you your reading rate per minute. So let's dive into the principles. Let's go. Maybe you'll be a superhero like Superman. First off, you want to understand eye fixations and saccades. So a fixation is the point where your eyes come to rest as you read, as seen in the circles of the picture on your left. The saccade is the moment when you move your eye from one fixation to the next. So the first technique I recommend is chunking. The more words you can take in with each fixation, the better. So rather reading one word at a time, if you can focus on 2 words at a time and then work your way up to 3 or 4 words, you can take in more content. Now, you might be a bit skeptical as to if this is possible, but you already do it, and you already do it with words you're very comfortable and familiar with. In fact, there's been studies done on this, and even when shapes are shown that look like words, people will instantly kind of take on the implications of that word and recognize them, even if they're not intended to do so. So words like stop, the stop sign, you immediately recognize the theme and message before you even recognize the word itself or the pronunciation. You don't have to spell it out. You don't have to pronounce it. It's something you're familiar with and you just take it in. So the more you get familiar with words and the more you practice, the more you can just chunk naturally. The second principle is to stop retrograding to previous words or lines by using a pointer. A pointer can be a pen or a finger, and you'll notice that children do this naturally. It might sound childish, but it is effective. They do it for a reason. It helps you position where you are on a page, and it keeps you moving forward, and it prevents you from getting lost on a page. When there's so many lines and it's just black and white text, you're bound to get lost and you might lose your place on the line. So it's a great way of just improving and keeping efficiency and the pace of your reading at a consistent pace. Your eyes are attracted to motion, so it naturally works really well. If you can keep a steady motion with your pointer, whatever that visual pacer is, it prevents you from losing touch. Most people underestimate the sense of touch, but like people who read Braille, touch is very powerful if you let it be. The next principle is using your peripheral vision. Most people do not use their peripheral vision because they don't realize they can. Now, as mentioned with the research I talked about earlier, once you use your peripheral too much and the words are outside of your fovea, there is an issue and you probably won't pick up as much. But you have to use at least some of it. Most people aren't doing it at all, and they're zeroing in on one word at a time, which is quite inefficient. So your peripheral vision, if you're not familiar, is your eye's ability to see all these different things at once, even stuff on the side of your vision. And mammals have this so that they can take in their surroundings all at once, even get stuff on the side of their eyes or side of their body, and this helps them not get killed. There's predators in the wild, and if there's something that catches your eye just on the side of your eye and it's a tiger that's trying to kill you, that's something you want to look out for. Now, therefore, it's important to start using more of your peripheral vision by chunking words and reading more words at once with the size of your eyes a bit. So in this picture, instead of just reading the words "the chief difficulty Alice" one at a time, you can chunk and not only chunk words, but also tweak when you start and end a line. So rather than starting at the very start of that line with your focus, the word "the," you can start towards the middle or the beginning to middle of a line, such as the word "chief" or the word "difficulty." By starting a couple words into the line, you are leveraging your peripheral vision. If you started at the very first word, then there's nothing but white space on your left, and you're not leveraging as much of your chunking or peripheral vision. And then also, you don't have to bring your focus all the way to the end of the line and the last word on the line. By using just a little bit of your peripheral vision, you can end your focus one word or two words before the end of the line and still catch the words right after it. This reduces eye movement and helps you with your ability to read. Now, the more you practice and the better you get, the later on in the line you can start and the earlier on in the line you can finish. Obviously, there's a limit to this and a point of diminishing returns based off the research I mentioned with the fovea. So, you can't go too far with this, but you can still do quite a lot. So those are the principles. If you want, you can measure your reading speed here. I have more higher level mindset principles that I think can help more. So if you want, you can test out those tips I just mentioned, those fundamental speed reading tactics and hacks, and go back to myreadspeed.com/calculate and see if they work. Or you can wait until I give you the mindset and higher level principles, which are just as important to really exponentiate your speed reading abilities, and then you can test your reading speed. So I have something called the 5 S's for you to improve your reading speed even more. Now, a couple of these might seem like common sense, but common sense is not common practice. It may seem obvious to you that some of these help or hurt if you don't do them, but most people don't do them, even if they do know. So that's why it's important to remind you of these and drill these into your head. The first one is to schedule it. All 5 tips start with an S. That's why they're called the 5 S's. If you schedule it into your time of day on your Google Calendar or any other calendar agenda device you have, or software or system, you can make sure you have time for it. If you don't schedule in your reading, then who knows when you ever have time for it. You're going to end up living life kind of like the wind, where it kind of goes where it pleases, and some days you might not have time for it, and other days you will, but not as much as you want, and you'll get distracted, and before you know it, a month will gone by and you haven't read at all. So if you don't want this to happen, schedule it into your calendar. The second would be socialized. So a key part of retaining the information you have is to actually tell someone else about this. By repeating what you learned in your own words to someone else, you are distilling the information you learned into a form that you understand and is digestible in your own voice. And one of the best ways of doing that is to tell someone about this, teach about this, find at least one other person and talk about what you read. It could be something that's really quick. Maybe you're going out with someone and you say, hey, real quick before we go, I'm practicing my reading ability and retention, and I want to share with you some cool insights I learned from a new book I just read. And if you're around like-minded, successful, ambitious people and you read a good book, of course they'll definitely be willing to help you, and more than that, they'll be eager to learn what you learned from that book. The third S is supporting information. Take notes, write an outline, and the ultimate goal of this outline is to distill it into the smallest set of notes as you can, preferably 1 page or shorter. And to do this, you want to start with something that's manageable. So your first version can be very long, but you can't keep it there. If it's a 37-page set of notes, then it's just another book, and it's going to be hard tying page 34 with page 3, and it's just going to be like reading another book, just shorter. So instead of writing another book to remember the first book you read, you want to distill your first set of notes down into a shorter set of notes. Take those big ideas and distill them down into as few words as you can. And just keep distilling it down until you turn that initial set of notes into maybe a smaller set of notes. Maybe it's 7 pages. But eventually get that down to 1 or 2 pages of an outline. And you'll notice you repeat yourself a lot and talk a lot. So it's much easier than you think. The next S is speech. So ultimately your goal is to get information into your brain. So why does it have to be through your eyes? It can be through speech. And by speech, I mean audiobooks or podcasts. Or it could be through your visual learning center. It could be through videos. Or it can be through other forms of text. Maybe you like learning more through tweets or LinkedIn posts or web articles. If your ultimate goal is to just get information in your brain, does it have to be through a hardcover book? Maybe it's through an ebook. For me, I found that out of the 3 main forms of learning, visual, audio, or text, I'm definitely by far a greater listener. I love to listen, and I believe most people are better listeners anyways. Our ancestors grew up for most of humanity's existence around a campfire as hunter-gatherers, learning through people telling stories. Therefore, the visual component wasn't really as strong. It was just this guy waving his hands around a fire. And there's no text. The printing press was really only invented in the last couple centuries. So mass-printed books wasn't really a thing. So if you're beating yourself up about why you can't get into a book and you can't get into reading more history or business books or self-help, well, it's not all lost. Sometimes it's just down to the fact that we're all genetically wired to be more listeners. I love to listen to audiobooks at 1.5 to 2 times speed, depending on how much I can adjust based on the topic of the book. Sometimes I'll listen to YouTube videos at 2 times speed. Usually they come with a visual component that you can't miss. Not always. Sometimes you can skip the visual component, but if I can't, I save that for times when I have the opportunity and time, and the only times to go on the computer and watch that. But other times when I'm only available to listen, such as when I'm driving or just working out, that's a fantastic time to incorporate the audio component. The final S is spotlight. Faster readers often have better, not worse, comprehension and retention because they have better focus. Spotlight your attention by focusing on how you're reading and optimizing it. Most people assume that the faster you read, the slower your retention is, and the more comprehension gets dropped. But we've all been in a situation where we've had to go through something that's very boring. We've had books that were really, really boring and they're very slow or too simple, but the speed that the teacher was teaching it was just way too slow, and we started to daydream. If you read slow, you'll probably get bored and distracted easier, but if you're challenging yourself and keeping the speed at a acceptable or even something that's pushing your comfort zone a little bit rate, then you're going to succeed. You're going to be more interested because you're taking more effort to keep up with that pace and understand what's being given to you. So make it fun, put in more effort, and it will pay off. Now, I want to address a couple concerns that are common after the speed reading course and principles are explained. The most common question is, well, I've had a little bit of experience with speed reading, or I'm trying this out, and man, I'm just trying so hard to like get up to that extremely fast reading rate, and I'm starting to burn out. Usually after a few pages, I just get so tired and I stop. And my recommendation and reply to that is that you want to do things at a sustainable rate. Practice and push your comfort zone just at a sustainable rate for you. You may be beating yourself up and trying to put too much on your plate too soon. Again, this is about patience and consistent practice and reflection and improving upon that over months or years. So it sometimes takes time to really work up to that pace. Therefore, if you're finding yourself burning out a lot, perhaps you're just trying to push the reading rate too fast too soon. The next big thing is, well, what about sub-vocalization? So that's a technique that that researcher I mentioned, Keith, has also written about and pointed to research that is debunking. So if you're not familiar with sub-vocalization, the principle is that people will read out words out loud in their own mind. So you can imagine how that slows down reading speed if you're reading every word out loud in your own mind, because you can only talk so fast. Now, Keith says that you can't completely eliminate self-vocalization because, on some level you are processing the messages in your mind. So that's why I didn't think I didn't want to include self-vocalization in this training. That said, I do think that to a certain degree you can eliminate a chunk of sub-vocalization, and to do that, all you have to do is jump back to the whole chunking principle I mentioned earlier. Remember how I mentioned how when you see a stop sign, you don't have to vocalize stop? The symbol, the words arranged how they did, automatically triggered the message and thought in your mind. So as you can see, certain words, after you become very familiar with them, they stop becoming words that you have to pronounce or spell out or even think about. They immediately trigger the message in your mind. So the more familiar you are, and you do that by reading more and practicing with words, the more they will imprint into your mind, and the less you'll have to sub-vocalize, because as soon as you see them, you know they're there. Another tip to eliminate more sub-vocalization is to use music. I recommend Baroque and classical music because that's the only type of music that has had any scientific research to back up its positive influence on your brain performance. But on top of that, you can also count. So by counting, you're saying something else rather than the words, which prevent you from sub-vocalizing, but also it keeps you at a constant pace. And you can use it in conjunction with chunking. So for every chunk of words you see, you can count. So it can be 1, 2, 3, 4. And in those 4 counts, 1, 2, 3, 4, or even at a slower pace, 1, 2, 3, 4. In each of those counts, you're looking at a new chunk of words. Finally, here's some references if you want any further reading or extra tools. Sprintreader.com is a free resource that tries to solve a lot of these eye inefficiencies by creating an innovative way of looking at and reading text. So essentially how it works is that there's a fixation point, and all the lines of text are flashed on your screen one at a time. So your eye doesn't have to move at all because the lines change for you. And you can also set the tool to show you a specific amount of words per line based on what you're comfortable with. You may want to start with one word at a time and slowly branch out to 5 or 6 words, or even 7 or 8. So that's a really cool tool. You can also set the speed as which new lines flash to you. And this works better if you have an ebook or anything you can copy and paste, because otherwise you can't use the tool. You have to copy and paste text in, and then it will show it to you one line at a time. There's also web apps and phone apps and other tools out there that do this too. Some for free, some that cost money. TTSreader.com turns any text you paste into the tool into audio. Now the audio is a bit robotic. You have quite a few choices to choose from, male voices and female, and you might be like, oh, it's too robotic for me, but test it out. It's really not that robotic. Voice technology is getting better year after year, and it's becoming more and more natural. You can also set the speed that they read it to. So I tend to set it to the fastest speed, which is about, I would guess, around 2.25 times as fast as a normal rate. And you know, there's Chrome extensions that do this. One called Spreed. I love to use the TTS reader because I'm more of a listener than a reader at times, and therefore I'll use that to convert web articles into audio. So there's a couple articles about speed reading that might be useful. Lifehacker.com has one called The Truth About Speed Reading. It references a few research studies in there. There's also the Wikipedia webpage on eye movement in reading if you want more resources and further reading on that. The podcast I recommend on this is called Quick Brain, Memory Improvement and Accelerated Learning. It's a great free podcast on speed reading as well as memorization. For speed reading rate tests, as mentioned, I recommend myreadspeed.com/calculate, but there's plenty out there. There's also freereadingtest.com. So thanks so much for watching. Hope you got some value out of this. I appreciate your comments, your questions, your feedback, how I can make this training better, and what you're concerned about, and so forth. Write to me, let me know, and thanks so much for partaking. Oh yeah, and don't forget, measure your speed reading rate now. Check out one of those measuring tools and measure your rate after you've implemented these principles.